A man knows when something in his house is off. It's in the silence, in the way things feel just a little too neat, too staged. And I've been ignoring it for too long. My name is Garrett Dalton. I'm 52 years old. I make my living guiding men through the wild, showing them how to track, how to survive. I grew up in the woods with my father, learned the land before I learned the ways of people. Some men find peace in church pews, some in the arms of a woman. I find mine in the quiet of the trees, in the crunch of earth beneath my boots, in the steady breath of my dog, Boone, at my side. Dana was different from me. Always was. She liked books, quiet cafes, long debates about things that didn't matter in the real world. Maybe that's why we lasted as long as we did, because we didn't get in each other's way. She had her life, I had mine. But lately, something felt off. The air between us had thickened, conversations grew shorter. I figured maybe that was just marriage. Turns out, it was something else. It started with a phone call. A number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was familiar, too friendly, like he was trying to soften a blow. Mr. Dalton, this is John from First Montana Financial. We're following up on the outstanding balance. Just checking if you'd like to set up a payment plan. Outstanding balance? I kept my voice even, but my grip tightened around the receiver. Yes, sir, the $12,800 owed on the account under your name. We've sent notices. I hung up. $12,000. I hadn't taken out a loan. I hadn't financed anything. My expenses were simple. Gas, groceries, occasional repairs on the truck. Boone cost more than I did. So who the hell was spending my money? I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, letting it settle. There were only two options. Either someone had stolen my identity or someone in this house was using my name. I didn't believe in coincidences. Dana was in town that evening, a book club or some other thing she never invited me to. I used the time, pulled out her desk drawer, careful to put everything back the way I found it. Bills, bank statements, all in neat stacks. She'd always been organized, always kept things in their place. But there it was, a credit card statement. My name. Transactions I never made. Missoula Art Supply, $230. The Blue Fox Restaurant, $178. The Timber Lodge, $340. My mouth went dry. The Timber Lodge was a hotel, a nice one. I flipped through more papers, my pulse a slow, steady drum. A withdrawal of $5,000 from our joint savings. Another from my personal account. More restaurants, more hotels. None of it was for me. I heard Boone shift on the porch, letting out a low huff. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. My father's old rifle leaned against the doorframe, a habit more than a need. I ran my hand over my jaw, thinking, Dana wasn't careless. She wouldn't have let me find this unless she thought I wouldn't look. I wasn't going to ask her. Asking gave her control. I'd spent my life tracking things that didn't want to be found, reading the land, watching for signs. A man who watches learns more than a man who asks. That night, I didn't sleep much. Boone lay at my feet, twitching in his dreams. I sat in the dark with a glass of whiskey, listening to the wind through the trees. There was no rush. I'd seen men blow up their lives in a rage, punch walls, make threats. But patience wins hunts. And this was a hunt now. Over the next week, I gathered the pieces. Dana wasn't just spending money, she was spending it on someone. A name started appearing, Daniel Ellis. I found it in an email she forgot to log out of, in a thank you note from some gallery, in a receipt left crumpled in the car. One night, she came home later than usual. I was at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. You're up late. Yeah. I took a sip. Had some things on my mind. She nodded, hesitated. Everything all right? I met her eyes. Yeah, just thinking about our finances. Her posture stiffened, just for a second. Most people don't notice things like that. But I do. Finances, she asked, too casual. I nodded. Got a call from the bank. She set her bag down carefully, too carefully. Oh. They said we've got an outstanding balance of over 12 grand. I let the words settle. She blinked, then laughed lightly. Oh. Garrett, I was going to tell you. I've been handling some expenses, and With a hotel? I cut in, voice even. She faltered. Garrett. I stood, chair scraping against the floor. Don't. I wasn't angry. Anger was too easy. I was something else. Colder. For the first time in years, she looked at me, really looked at me, and realized she'd underestimated me. I grabbed my keys, my jacket. You do what you need to do, Dana, I said, walking to the door. But so will I. I stepped out, Boone following close behind. The night air was cool, clean. I took a deep breath, the kind that settles a man's thoughts. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to handle it. I spent the next few days doing what I did best, watching, listening, waiting. Dana didn't bring it up again, which told me everything I needed to know. A woman who isn't guilty gets defensive. A woman who knows she's caught goes quiet and hopes you'll drop it. I didn't drop things. Instead, I started learning about Daniel Ellis. An artist, or so he called himself. From what I could dig up, he painted abstracts, the kind of stuff that belonged in overpriced galleries where people drank wine and pretended to understand what they were looking at. A few articles mentioned him as a promising talent, but nothing suggested he was actually making money. That part made sense. Men like him don't survive on talent alone. They survive by finding someone to fund them. And in this case, that someone was my wife. I drove into Missoula, keeping my truck slow, steady. There was no real plan, not yet. Just a need to see the man for myself. I parked outside a small gallery, the kind with big windows and too much empty space inside. A flyer taped to the glass advertised an upcoming showcase. Daniel Ellis. His name printed in pretentious, minimalist font. I walked in. The place smelled like paint and polish. A woman behind the desk looked up, about to greet me, but something in my face must have made her change her mind. I wandered the space, looking at his work. Messy splashes of color, shapes that meant nothing, price tags that made my stomach tighten. And then, there he was, Daniel Ellis. Slim, messy hair, paint on his hands like he thought that made him authentic. He was talking to a couple, gesturing toward one of his pieces, smiling like he had a secret the rest of us were too dumb to understand. His voice was soft, deliberate, the kind of tone that made women lean in, made them feel like he saw them. I stayed back, arms crossed, watching. The couple walked off, leaving him alone, and for a moment, he just stood there, adjusting his shirt cuffs, glancing around. He didn't look like a man in love. He looked like a man waiting for something, waiting for the next opportunity, the next check, the next fool to believe in him. I didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, I walked out, back to my truck, and called an old friend. Hatcher, I said when he picked up. Garrett, he greeted. What's going on? You still working real estate? You know it. I need a favor. There was a pause. Hatcher and I went way back. He knew I wasn't the kind of man who asked for things without reason. What kind of favor? Looking for some info on a guy, I said, keeping it vague. He renting? Owning? Got anything under his name? Give me a name, I'll see what I can do. Daniel Ellis. Missoula. Artist. Hatcher exhaled a laugh. Christ, an artist? Didn't think you had an eye for that kind of thing, Garrett. I don't. That was all I needed to say. He understood. Give me a couple days, he said. I'll get back to you. I hung up and sat there for a long time, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Dana hadn't called, hadn't texted. I wondered if she was waiting for me to explode, to demand answers. But I wasn't interested in answers. I was interested in results. That night, I went home and made myself a stiff drink. Dana was already in bed, or pretending to be. I sat at the kitchen table, Boone lying at my feet, and thought about my father. He was the one who taught me how to hunt. A good hunter doesn't chase, he'd say. He lets the prey come to him. I wasn't going to confront Dana. I wasn't going to ask her why. I was going to make damn sure she regretted it. 2 days later, Hatcher called me back. Got something for you, he said. Daniel Ellis doesn't own a damn thing. He's been renting a studio apartment above some bookstore, but get this, he's behind on rent. Landlord's been trying to reach him, but the guy keeps dodging calls. Looks like your boy's got money problems. That right? I said, staring out at the woods, watching the wind move through the trees. Oh yeah, and here's the kicker. Dana's been making some big withdrawals lately. You put 2 and 2 together. I already had. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was keeping him afloat. I let out a slow breath. Appreciate it, Hatcher. You want me to keep digging? No, I said. I got what I need. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, rubbing my jaw. Daniel Ellis was living off my wife's generosity, and she was using my name to do it. A lesser man would have gone straight to his door, knocked him flat, made a scene. But that wasn't me. Men like Daniel weren't built to handle pressure. They were built to talk, to charm, to ride the waves of other people's effort. What happens when you take that away? When you push them into deep water and watch them flail? I was about to find out. The next day, I made a call. A buddy of mine owed me a favor, The kind of guy who could make a person's life difficult without ever breaking a law. A fake debt collector, someone who could put the squeeze on Daniel, make him feel the walls closing in. How much you want to hit him for? My guy asked. Start with 20 grand, I said. See how he handles it. He let out a low whistle. Ruthless, Garrett. Just getting started. A week later, Daniel started spiraling. I kept my distance, but Hatcher fed me updates. The artist was panicking, missing meetings, making frantic calls. Then, he got fired from whatever side job he'd been clinging to. Money was drying up. Dana? She was starting to feel it, too. I could see it in the way she moved around the house, the way she checked her phone like she was waiting for bad news. She didn't know that bad news was me. One night, I sat on the porch, Boone at my side, watching the sky go dark. The hunt was nearing its end, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Dana had no idea what was coming. She moved through the house like a woman walking through deep water, slow and careful, sensing something was off but not knowing where the current would pull her. I could see it in the way she checked her phone, the way she hesitated before speaking, the way she avoided meeting my eyes for too long. She was waiting for me to explode. That's what most men do in these situations: shout, throw things, demand answers. But I wasn't most men, and I had no interest in answers. I already knew everything I needed to know. One evening, I was out in the garage, checking over the truck, when she came to the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me. You've been quiet, she said. I wiped my hands on a rag, took my time before answering. Not much to say. You sure about that? I looked at her then, really looked at her. She was still the woman I'd married, but I saw her differently now. The sharp lines of her jaw, the way she adjusted her glasses when she was thinking, things I used to admire, things I used to trust. Yeah, I said, turning back to the truck. I'm sure. She hesitated, then nodded, like she was waiting for me to say more. When I didn't, she left. That was fine. She'd understand soon enough. I made another call the next morning. My guy had done his job well. Daniel was unraveling fast. Man's been dodging calls left and right, he told me. Landlord's about ready to toss him out. Boss let him go. He's been showing up at that gallery looking like a wreck, asking around about loans, favors. He's desperate. Good, I said. I had one more move to make before I pulled the trigger. That afternoon, I met Hatcher at a diner off the highway, one of those places that still had a counter where the regulars sat and drank coffee all day. He was already there when I walked in, stirring sugar into his cup, a smirk playing at his lips. Man, I don't know what this guy did to you, he said as I sat across from him. But you are putting him through the ringer. He deserves worse, I said. Hatcher chuckled. I believe it. So what's next? Can you get word to Dana's parents? His eyebrows lifted. Oof, that's a big one. They're about to invest a lot of money in her future, I said, leaning forward. They deserve to know what she's doing with it. Hatcher shook his head, grinning. Cold-blooded. Just honest. He took a sip of coffee, then nodded. Yeah, I can do that. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, drinking my coffee, watching Dana as she moved around, distracted. Got a call from my mom today, she said, stirring sugar into her tea. She sounded off. That right? Yeah, she frowned. She asked if everything was okay, if I needed money. I met her eyes, let the silence stretch. She shifted, uncomfortable. Garrett, is something going on? I took my time before answering, setting my mug down with a quiet thud. What do you think? Her throat worked as she swallowed. I think you're angry. I don't get angry, I said. I get even. She blinked, but before she could speak, my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, read the text from Hatcher. She knows. Her dad knows. Let the fireworks begin. I slid my phone back into my pocket and stood, grabbing my jacket. Boone stretched out at my feet, sensing movement, ready to follow. Dana watched me, tension in her shoulders. Where are you going? She asked. Out. Garrett, But I was already at the door, stepping into the cool night air, Boone at my side. The hunt was almost over, and I wasn't about to let the prey slip away now. I spent the next few days letting the fire spread. Dana didn't say much, but I could see it working on her, the way a slow poison takes hold. She was on edge, checking her phone constantly, pacing the kitchen at night, like she could outwalk her own guilt. I didn't ask who she was texting. I already knew. Her father was an old-school businessman, the kind who valued reputation almost as much as money. When he found out what she'd been doing, there was no pleading, no second chances. He pulled his financial support immediately. No trust fund, no inheritance, no safety net. That's when the real cracks started showing. It happened late one evening. I was sitting on the porch, sharpening my knife. Boone stretched out beside me. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The screen door creaked open behind me, and Dana stepped out, arms wrapped around herself. "You did this," she said, her voice tight. I didn't look up. "Did what?" "You told my father." I dragged the blade against the whetstone, slow, deliberate. Man deserved to know where his money was going. She let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "Jesus, Garrett." I set the knife down, finally looking at her. "You stole from me." "It wasn't." She stopped herself, jaw tightening. "I was helping him. He needed." I laughed, low and humorless. "He needed a free ride. And you were dumb enough to give it to him." Her face twisted, but she didn't argue. "Couldn't." "I don't know when you started thinking I was stupid, Dana," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But you should have known better than to steal from a man who makes his living tracking things down." She swallowed hard, looking away. I let the silence stretch, let her sit in it. Then, as if on cue, her phone rang. She flinched before pulling it from her pocket, staring at the screen. I could see the name even from where I sat. "Daniel." I gestured at it. "Go ahead. Answer it." She hesitated, then pressed the button, bringing it to her ear. "Daniel." Even from a few feet away, I could hear the panic in his voice. "Dana, I need help. They're saying I owe 20 grand. They're calling my work my landlord." "You don't owe 20 grand, she snapped. "I don't know what's happening," he said, voice cracking. "I just got evicted. My stuff is on the damn curb, Ev." I watched her face as reality set in. Her hands trembled slightly, her breath quickened. She turned away from me, lowering her voice. "I can't do anything right now. I don't have access to the money anymore." A pause. Then his voice, sharp. "What do you mean, you don't have access?" She swallowed. "My father, he cut me off." Silence. Then, something shifted. His voice lost its desperation, flattening into something colder. "So you can't help me?" "Daniel, Click. She stared at the phone like it had betrayed her. I let out a low whistle. That was fast. She turned on me, eyes blazing. "What did you do?" I met her gaze without flinching. "Took away his safety net. Same as I took away yours." Her chest rose and fell. Quick, shallow breaths. "You wanted me to suffer." "No," I said evenly. "I wanted you to understand." She shook her head, stepping back. "You're not the man I married." I laughed, standing up, stretching my shoulders. "Maybe you never knew me at all." She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked back inside, shutting the door behind her. I sat back down, picking up my knife, and went back to sharpening. Boone let out a slow exhale, resting his head on his paws. The work wasn't done yet, but it was close. Dana didn't try to talk to me after that night. She moved around the house like a ghost, quiet, distracted, the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her phone stopped ringing. No more texts, no more late-night whispers. Daniel had vanished. Hatcher called me 2 days later. "Your boy packed up and skipped town," he said, chewing on something loud enough for me to hear. "Guess he figured Montana wasn't treating him too well." "Figured as much," I said, watching Boone nose around the yard. "Word is he tried hitting up a few other women for help," Hatcher went on, "but no one was biting. Kind of hard to sell the whole tortured artist thing when you're begging for rent money." I let out a short breath. "What about Dana?" "Well, she's still here," he said. "But from what I hear, she's got nothing left to fall back on. No money, no lover, no sympathy from her family. She's on her own." "Good." I hung up and went back inside. Dana was sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at a half-empty coffee cup. She looked up when she heard me, but I didn't stop, just walked past her and grabbed my jacket. "Where are you going?" she asked. Her voice was tired, small. "Got work to do." "Garrett." I turned, leaning against the doorframe. She hesitated, then sighed. "Are you ever going to talk to me?" I studied her for a moment. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the same person I married. Or maybe she was, and I was just now seeing her clearly. "Talk about what?" I asked. She spread her hands. "Everything. This. Us. There is no us." Her face tightened, and for the first time, I saw something close to real regret in her eyes. But it was too late for that. "I'll be filing the divorce papers this week," I said, watching her reaction. She nodded slowly, running a hand through her hair. I figured. I pushed off the doorframe and walked out to the truck. I didn't slam the door, didn't throw anything, didn't look back. I was done. The next few weeks were quiet. Papers were signed, bank accounts were separated, and the house, my house, was legally mine. Dana packed a few bags and left without a word. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't care. I focused on the work. Spent more time out in the garage, fixing up old trucks, getting a business plan together. Something about rebuilding engines, taking things apart, and putting them back together made sense to me in a way that people never had. One afternoon, Hatcher stopped by, leaning against the hood of my truck with a grin. "So what now, Dalton? You got your revenge, got rid of the dead weight. What's next?" I wiped my hands on a rag, thinking, going to make something for myself. "You already had something." "Not like this," I said, glancing around the garage. "This is mine. No one can take it from me." He nodded, watching me. "Well, if you ever need a business partner, you know where to find me." I smirked. "I'll keep that in mind." He clapped me on the shoulder and walked off, leaving me to my work. The sun was setting by the time I finished for the day. I stepped outside, Boone trotting up beside me, his tail wagging. The air was crisp, clean, the kind of air that reminded a man he was still alive. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. No weight, no doubts. Just the road ahead. The garage smelled like oil and old steel, the kind of scent that got under your skin and stayed there. I liked it. There was honesty in mechanics. Things either worked or they didn't. No pretending, no games. Just metal, tools, and time. I was finishing up a carburetor rebuild when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Boone perked up, ears twitching. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out just as a familiar truck rolled to a stop. Hatcher climbed out, stretching like he'd been sitting too long. "Damn, Dalton, you really went full throttle with this place," he said, glancing around. "Looks like a real business." "That's the plan," I said, tossing the rag onto the workbench. He walked over, giving the truck I was working on a once-over. "What's the deal with this one?" "78 Ford," I said. Guy brought it in thinking it was junk. Just needed someone who knew what the hell they were doing. Hatcher smirked. "Sounds familiar." I let out a short breath, shaking my head. "Yeah." He leaned against the workbench, studying me. "So, how's it feel?" I knew what he meant. I thought about it for a second, rolling my shoulders. "Feels like I should have done this a long time ago." He nodded, like he'd been expecting that answer. "You hear from her?" "No," I said, grabbing a wrench. "And I don't expect to." "Good," he said, watching me work. "She doesn't deserve to." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Hatcher stayed a while, shooting the breeze, but eventually he took off. I finished up for the night, locked up the garage, and walked out back where the woods stretched into the hills. Boone followed, his nose to the ground, always alert. The sky was clear, the kind of deep blue that meant the temperature would drop fast. I liked this time of day, when the world got quiet and a man could hear himself think. Dana was gone. Daniel was probably halfway to whatever city would tolerate his kind. My money was mine again, my house was mine again, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't owe anybody a damn thing. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about getting back to who I was before I let someone else steer me off course. I took a deep breath, let it out slow. Boone sat beside me, his head against my leg, steady as ever. Yeah, I was right where I was supposed to be. A month passed. Then two. The last of the paperwork went through, the divorce finalized. Clean break. No arguments over money, no drawn-out negotiations. She walked away with whatever she had left, which wasn't much. I walked away with everything that mattered. My name, my land, my business. Boone at my side. I didn't hear from her again. Not directly, anyway. Small town like this, people talk. Heard she was renting a tiny apartment in Missoula, trying to put herself back together. Last I checked, the art gallery had dropped her from their board. Her father wasn't speaking to her. Whatever money she thought she had was gone, and she was learning real fast that the kind of people she ran with didn't stick around when the checks stopped coming. Daniel? He'd disappeared. Maybe he conned some other woman into paying his bills. Maybe he was flipping burgers somewhere, crying into his apron about how the world didn't appreciate his art. Didn't matter. He was nothing now. Less than nothing. Hatcher came by one afternoon, leaning against his truck with a grin. "You ready to admit you owe me a beer for all the strings I pulled?" I chuckled, nodding toward the cooler by the garage. Help yourself. He popped the top, took a long sip, and let out a satisfied sigh. So what's next, Dalton? You got your revenge, got your shop up and running. What's left? I looked around. The garage was steady now, turning a decent profit. I had customers lined up, word getting out that if you wanted something done right, you brought it to Dalton. I had a group of local kids I was teaching, boys with no fathers, boys who needed something real to hold on to. I showed them how to track, how to gut a deer, how to build a fire that wouldn't smoke them out. Taught them how to be men in a world that wanted them soft. Nothing left, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. I'm right where I want to be. Hatcher nodded, tipping his bottle toward me. Damn right. That night, I sat on the porch with Boone, watching the stars come out. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. I thought about my father, about the things he taught me. A man provides. A man protects. A man walks away from what doesn't serve him. I ran a hand over Boone's head, feeling the solid weight of him, the steady heartbeat of a creature that had never let me down. Some men lose themselves chasing things that don't matter. Love, approval, some idea of happiness. They were sold like a cheap truck that breaks down after the first hard mile. I wasn't one of those men. Not anymore. I had my land, my work, my name, and that was enough.